It's the Blues Rock Show with Pete Francis and Willie Witten.
Welcome to the Blues Rock Show. I'm Pete Francis, joined by Willie Witten. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to get all the latest videos. And Willie, this week we're going to get things kicked off with a pretty interesting topic, and that's modern day guitar heroes. I think growing up, when guitar music was a little more popular and a little more mainstream, it was easier to pick out who the guitar heroes of the generation were. Obviously, I think growing up for both of us, and even though he was before our time, Jimi Hendrix was somebody who everybody would talk about as a guitar hero. But I think today, because guitar is not as prominent in popular music, I think the question is a little harder to answer. So, Willie, today, who are the most influential guitar players of today, specifically in the blues rock genre, in your mind?
I think it is a different question in today's market. And I think the market plays a big part in it because listeners and players, they're going to have a different list of who they think the heroes are. And that's because of exactly what you said. It's not as popular as it once was, at least commercially. Certainly the players and the real fans, they love it just as much as they ever had, if not more. So I think when we talk about listeners, we're talking about a name, a Jack White, Gary Clark Jr. I think we could even, on a lesser degree, talk about a Warren Haynes, popularity-wise. I think Derek Trucks in that same echelon as Warren. After that, it starts to diverge. I think then there's certainly, for the guitar players, there's a ton of people. We spoke about Eric Gales last week. I know that there are a lot of people that think he is the quintessential guitar player, and he is definitely right up near the top for anyone who knows the genre. I think we're going to find other names that are less known to people. I think we could even put in, I know this is a wild card, but I think the Lovell Sisters at times have some wonderful riffs, and I'm talking about Lark and Poe. Pete, I think at this point we're talking maybe more of the people who don't get as much notoriety. Who are some of these guys, some of these men and women that you think are the heroes?
Well, I think when you're talking about blues rock, I think you got to mention Joe Bonamassa right off the bat. Because even when you look at a guy like Joe, even though he's so well known in guitar circles or to people who like blues rock music, he's still not necessarily a mainstream name that's going to get recognized everywhere he goes when he walks down the street.
Right.
But I think over the past decade, as far as the blues rock thing goes, I think Joe is definitely as influential as anybody. I think there's tons of people out there who are emulating Joe on YouTube. I think his reach goes all over the world, and he's influencing guitar players all over the world. So I think you definitely have to mention a guy like Joe. You mentioned Gary Clark Jr.
Sure.
I think he's one of the most mainstream guys as far as blues rock goes. And what's great about Gary is he appeals to pretty much all ages. And he can play so many different styles. And I think that's part of his appeal and how he can bring so many people in and influence so many people is because he can play blues, he can play rock, he can play funk, he's soul, hip hop, R&B. He can do all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think one thing about Gary too is he kind of has that hip factor about him, that cool factor. And I think sometimes there's some stereotypes around blues that maybe it's just your dad's music and it's, an older generation and it's not for young people. Well, I think Gary kind of brings those young people in and shows that the blues can be cool. So I think Gary Clark Jr. is definitely super influential. You got to mention a guy like Kenny Wayne Shepherd. He's right there at the top. You mentioned Eric Gales as far as modern day players. I think you got to throw in a guy like John Mayer, obviously. With his mainstream success and appeal.
Yes.
I think as far as guitar players and popular music, he's one of the few guys out there that can still play guitar and put guitar on his records. Right. So I think he's definitely worth mentioning. And then you got to mention a guy like Philip Sayce. He's right up there at the top today with some of the best guitar players on the planet. There are very few guys out there that play with his passion and energy. I think Philip Sayce is great. You look at a guy like Dan Patlansky from South Africa. Sure. Who's a two-time winner of Blues Rock Review's Album of the Year. He's a phenomenal player, not as well known outside of South Africa. He's kind of breaking into the European market, not super well known here in the States, but I think he's a great player. And I think what's interesting is you kind of have the current Mount Rushmore of guys as far as blues rock, and they're all kind of in that same age range. They're all kind of early mid 40s, and I think that's
Right.
kind of where the top guys are. But then you've got the younger guys as well, like Marcus King.
Right.
I would throw Kingfish in there, Eric Steckel, Ryan McGarvey. Those are really talented guitar players as well. So it's a really interesting question because, yeah, I think these are different times. And while there are some phenomenal guitar players out there today, they're just not as well known as they would have been 20 or 30 years ago.
You're right. The age demographic has shifted for who tends to be at the top. I'm not so sure why that is. Maybe part of it is the aging listener demographic. So I think that's correct. I also want to throw in a couple names there that I think are great. I thought Ryan Perry, first album on his own, Hard Times, was wonderful. Really great, a gritty sound. Throws in some great guitar lines, maybe not as much flash, but a wonderful voice to match. His guitar is incredible. King Solomon Hicks, a very young man. He's probably about 22 now. If there's someone who reminds me of the traditional B.B. King style blues, just wonderfully inventive, crisp, great playing. There's a lot of young guys, but you're right, Pete. The age has skewed over for who we put on that proverbial Rushmore.
Well, and there's a lot of guys that are just super underrated too. Alan Nimmo from King.
Sure.
Simon McBride is another guy who's super underrated. Anthony Gomes is a great player as well. So yeah, there's just so many, but I think that Mount Rushmore is kind of that age group in that 40s age range right now, where you got your Bonamassas, your Kenny Wayne Shepherds, Derek Trucks, Eric Gales, Philip Sace. Like those guys, I think right now are kind of the guys that are really influencing that next generation.
I agree.
All right, so let's talk female blues rock artists. Beth Hart has had a lot of success in recent years, and she's obviously fantastic. Willie, do you think she's the preeminent female blues rock artist of today?
I think yes. Or at least when I say yes, I don't have any fear that I'm going to regret it later. And I say that because popularity wise, she ticks the box, and she ticks and exceeds the box of skill, honesty, grit, multifaceted songs and multifaceted instrumentalists, whether it's a song that's based around a piano, guitar, she'll play and write by herself. She's done some great stuff with Joe Bonamassa. Yeah, I think you could put her at the top. I'm not going to say that that's a shoo-in because there's a lot of big competition out there, I think. Samantha Fish, we'll throw her right back in there too. She's had a wonderful ascent recently. She tends to have maybe more of that electric guitar persona behind her, but she has a lot of energy, writes great songs. Larkin Poe, I'll throw them in there. Let's not forget about Shamika Copeland. Her last album was wonderful too. She is a very distinct voice.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something about Beth Hart that is just, it's that ability to, gosh, it sounds like every song she's singing, it's as if it's her last. And it's a hard quality to duplicate. And I'm not taking anything against these other names I'm saying. I think they're wonderful as well. But Beth Hart is a safe pick and not for a bad reason. What do you think, Pete? Agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Beth Hart right now, as far as female blues rock acts, she's at the top. But I mean, I would put her at the top really just with blues rock in general. In terms of her vocals, there are just very few people who can sing like Beth Hart. And you mentioned just the way every, song she sings, she just pulls you in, and there's very few people out there that listen to Beth Hart and are like, you know what? Not for me. I mean, pretty much everyone who listens to her music really enjoys her music because, her vocals are just super powerful. She writes good songs, and really she just has it all together. And I think she's definitely one of the top acts out there. Just very few people can sing like Beth Hart. And I think as far as modern day blues rock, she's as good as anybody.
I agree. It is right. It has nothing to do with men or women. She is, I think, one of the top 3 voices currently, men, women, blues, rock, soul, whatever genre you have. I can make a case for her being one of the top 3 voices, period. I really think that people will look back and take a look at her voice and how distinct it is. That warble she has, that emotion, it's all there. Nary a false note on top of it, which is nearly impossible to do when you're singing at that level, when you're pinning the needle as often as she does. She's really tremendous. But I think you also make a good point, and it comes off the back of Beth Hart when we talk about her. This is not a male or female performance thing. Some of the other names that I said too, I think that it's nice to see that we throw in Samantha Fish when we think of Larkin Poe as every bit as good as these male artists. And I think, not to get back on our original topic, but I think that you'll see in coming years that when we talk about the guitar heroes, don't be surprised if there's not a few more women in those ranks. So that's a great thing. It's overdue. And I think that there's a lot of good music that people will get to hear because of it that they otherwise would not have.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And Beth Hart, she's just so genuine and authentic. And there's just very few artists that can match that.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about Spotify next. And this is going to be a little controversial. And every time we talk about Spotify is controversial, right?
Yep.
But so basically Spotify is making a pretty big change. And this is about their promotion. So they're adding a new feature where basically if you select this feature as an artist, Spotify is going to help promote your music more. But there's a catch. And the catch is basically that you're going to get paid less money. So right now, obviously, there are huge issues right now with the amount of money that artists are getting paid for streaming. Well, if you use this promotional feature, you're going to get even less money. So, Willie, do you think this is going to end up helping artists, or do you think it's just another way for Spotify to make more money?
Well, I'll start with, it's hard to get a lot less of 0.4 of a cent, which I believe is somewhere in the range of the average click. Obviously, it varies. So right off the bat, when we talk about less for the artist, I feel that that's sort of almost a non-starter for some people, unless the idea is once again that, hey, Spotify says and you do. And it can be hard to say no to what Spotify puts out because they are such a behemoth in this market. I think that the reaction to a lot of this from a lot of people is going to bring up all the negative connotations that surround anything that even slightly resembles pay for play. Now, that's not completely fair because pay for play is advertising is pay for play. Pay for play exists around us all the time. Pay for play is when you go to a theme park, quite literally. But it needs to be above the board. That's how you stay away from things in terms like payola. Now, Spotify's as big as radio once was, I think. So you run that line. Now, Spotify has said what they're intending to do. So there's nothing here that's untowards about disclosure and what's going on.
Well, and just to be clear, the artist does not have to opt into this.
That's true. I think, though, for the artist, it's hard because, A, they're going to get less money. So I think from the artist standpoint, that's not all that great. From the listener standpoint, if I've cultivated playlists, well, so now I'm going to have yet another part of the algorithm. Hey, as a listener, I thought the algorithm was based upon what I like to hear, Pete. I didn't think it was going to be based upon who's paying what that I don't know of. So it benefits Spotify, perhaps. I don't know, but I don't see the benefit for the listener, and I certainly don't see the benefit for the artist. What do you see about this? Like, can this
at the end of the day, Willie, I think
artist?
this is the way that Spotify is going to get more money into their own pockets. Now, will this work for a few artists? Maybe. Yeah, I think it probably will. But for the majority of artists, they're probably just going to lose out on more money. Because if think about this, if you had over 50% of the artists on Spotify opting in, think about how many artists they're competing against to get that extra promotion. I mean, how much extra promotion can you really get if everybody else is doing it?
If everyone else is doing it, you're right back to square zero.
Yeah, so I think it makes it really difficult for the artists. And I think you're going to end up with a situation where you're going to have a few artists that benefit, but just like everything else, then you're going to have everybody else on the side who really isn't getting a whole lot of benefit out of it. And streaming rates are already really bad for artists, and it's just going to get worse. So yeah, I think it's good for Spotify, but
Right.
not really good for the consumer, because if they're getting led to stuff that they're not necessarily interested in, and not really great for the artist either, because again, they're already making very little off Spotify. Majority of artists are not making
Right.
anything off Spotify, and then they're going to be making even less. So yeah, I think it's kind of not really a win-win here. I think maybe for Spotify, it's going to help them. And again, the reason why they're doing it is because they probably see this as an avenue to make more money. And it's really the artists and the consumers who are going to suffer from this.
And I think I want to make clear from my perspective, I don't have a problem with businesses making money.
Yeah.
That is their desire to make money. They have no qualms about saying it. There's nothing wrong with that. But in a world that we would like to think of has some sort of parity, maybe a bit of fairness, you would hope that that business making their gazillions of dollars helps to bring a couple ships along with them. And the idea is, if Spotify's making more money, if artists are making more money, and consumers are getting a better experience, then win-win-win is a win. And
Yeah.
I think that's great. Then, hey, make as much money as you can. This seems a little bit underhanded, because just on our brief discussion, it seems like, yeah, Spotify might win. Artists, by definition of what they're going to do, they will get less, at least at the outset. And the listener's algorithm is diluted, because now we have to decide who's getting the most pay in and who's going to get those ears. And it's not going to be up to the listeners either. I think Spotify will come to regret this. I think it's a bad look for them.
Yeah, right now you already have that huge discrepancy on Spotify in terms of these are the artists who actually make money on Spotify,
Right.
and then everybody else doesn't make money on Spotify. I mean, even artists who are getting millions and millions of streams, a lot of them aren't making a whole lot of money. I mean, a lot of them are making less than minimum wage basically
Right.
on Spotify. And this new feature seems like that's going to make the discrepancy even worse, honestly.
I agree, Pete.
All right. What do you guys think about these topics? A lot to dive into this week. Let us know down in the comments section below. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to get all the latest videos. But for now, I'm Pete Francis. He's Willie Witten. This is the Blues Rock Show. We'll see you next time.